Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you for this roundtable, Data Space, the European Revenge, question mark. Let's note that because it's going to be the main topic of our debate. And I have the pleasure to welcome four senior people, and I'm going to tell you who they are. We have Stéphane Lemaire, Project Director about Safety and Sovereign Domain at Orange, and also in charge of the working group about occlusive sovereignty. Then we have Philippe Latombe, elected representative and very active in the digital technologies, and many of you follow him for that. Then we have Johan Sieur, a senior cloud architect at Yonos, and Louis Noges, director of WizIO Strategy and chairman of Diesel Innovation. And we have the pleasure to welcome Mrs. Constance Nebula. Please join us. Take the time to take a seat. I know that you're very busy. Thank you for being here. Constance Nebula is the vice chairwoman of the region Pays de la Loire. So welcome all of you for this roundtable. So Mrs. Nebula, just take your breath and we'll interview you later on. Let me start with the first question in this roundtable, and we'll give time for some questions and answers with you. We'll take all of your questions at the end of the roundtable, obviously. The first question, maybe for you, Philippe Latombe. You are the man from the Commission of Laws. You are elected representative on the table. So we see that for some months, a lot of regulation is coming from Europe. We have Data Act, Data Governance Act, IA Act, Cyber Resilience, DMA, DSA, and many others, so that we are a bit caught in that forest of laws, decrease regulations. Could you please describe for us, could you please clarify the topic of our roundtable? What about these laws and decrees? How can they help us find our way in data spaces and take back the lead in Europe? Good morning. First of all, I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the question. When we talk about regulation, most people say there are so many, too many regulations, we regulate too much. What about that whole set of texts? And we need, in fact, to take them with some distance, because they are always there to cover one scope and one topic. If we take NIS 2, that's going to be published in October, it's there to increase the skills of all companies on the whole territorial European level. With the GDPR, the idea was to protect the personal data of European citizens in all countries at the same level. And there are many different regulations. And we need to consider them as a point painting, because we need to take some distance to look at them from the sky. And that image is the protection of citizens, companies, and the union in the cyberspace. The only difficulty, in fact, is a difficulty of cohesion and relevance between the texts. We see that on the IA Act, there is a big work of cohesion with GDPR. How with that generative intelligence act, we can organize it with the protection of personal data. And that's the role of the lawmaker in Europe. It is to coordinate it all. And they have started doing so, having texts not as easy to modify when they are transposed in the countries. GDPR had a transposition so that there were some gaps between countries, and we have understandings of the GDPR that differ, not talking even about Ireland, and maybe we'll come back on the notion of sovereignty there. But on the SADMA, the Commission has kept a restricted area and makes laws for all countries. And on this too, there will be a transposition which will be very light, mostly transpositions on technical areas and not on the mindset of the text. Who is impacted? How is it going to work? The idea is to have the text, but to coordinate them, to structure them, in order to have a kind of grid that protects companies, citizens, and the union institutions. Thank you. When we prepared the roundtable with each of you, I remember a discussion with you, Louis, and you told me, is that really the right topic? Is it the concern of companies nowadays? Is that really necessary? And on the other side of the Atlantic, you have the Cloud Act and other pieces of law. How do you perceive that balance between the European regulation and what we have in the US in terms of law and practice beyond the law? Could you clarify the topic? Thank you for the invitation. Hello, everyone. If I'm here, that's because I publish a monthly report in INCYBER, and I'm also a software editor. I've been working for 20 years in the cloud, and you'll be happy because I have a basis in Angers as well. So data. Data is a raw material of IT, and even more so in artificial intelligence because they need data. So we need to understand that it's essential. But data needs to be shared. Data is raw material that we need to share. And a reasonable approach is to share by default and only protect by exception. And France is well positioned in open data. I think you'll come on the topic. Data is there to be shared. So where do we stand today? I have zero skill on the large public. My only skill is about the professional area. So I'm not going to talk about TikTok or others. In the professional world today, it is a total catastrophe. 95% of data finds itself in on-premise or hosted environments that is not encrypted. And then you hear about catastrophes. The protection of data is important, and the response is easy, obvious, basic. It's encryption. Why don't we encrypt? The keys of encryption are there forever. And when you put data in the big bad American cloud, it's 100% encrypted. When you transfer your data from a home prem, you know, there are still people who do these archaic measures. And when you transfer them to the public cloud, you improve the protection from 1 to 1,000. And straight away, nothing more to do. It's encrypted. Then, of course, we can discuss encryption keys. Because you'll tell me, well, keys are led by the stakeholders of the cloud. Well, yes, but it's already better. And what about if we ask them data and so on? When Amazon, Google, or any stakeholders, when we give them the data, it can be encrypted. They don't need to decipher them. Today, no problem with that. It works very well. There's a massive protection. And my main concern is to protect the 95% of French companies that are private or public SMEs and that have zero protection. We see that every week. One hospital, one town hall is attacked. There's a priority. That's where we need to act. And sometimes the question is asked about the Cloud Act. And I still need to repeat that it has nothing to do with the cloud. It's simply an acronym. In my eyes, that's clarification, lawful, overseas user data. It's there to help the transfer of data from a legal way. That's due to when Microsoft refused to provide the US the data of a drug trafficker that was well known. I can't even remember his name. And it was stored in Ireland. And Microsoft said, I don't provide the data to you. It went to the Supreme Court. And that's where the Cloud Act derives. So the priority, once again, is to go to the core of things. Of course, you could call it FISA 102. That's for 0.001% of gap. When you are encrypted with these stakeholders, you're all right. And then you also have Thales that gives you some outside encryption keys that you can put as an additional layer. So you're really quite with that. We have responses in 2024. No difficulty with that. Thank you, Louis. We'll come back on it because I've seen some people reacting around me. We'll give you time for the reactions later on. Constance Nevula, over to you. You are the chairwoman of Open Data France, and we are interested in hearing your opinion on that, and also the role of Open Data France on these topics of data space. So I hand over to you for a clarification. Thank you. Hello, everyone. You said that you know companies. I know local authorities. Open Data France is an association that has as members local authorities. And for 10 years, they are promoting opening data, standardization, reuse, use cases, data for what, with the question of opening public data by local authorities, which is a legal obligation, as you know. The first part of the topic that you had provided me with is legal. And we can assert that from the point of view of Europe, the Commission has been activist from a legal and regulatory point of view, and strongly so on digital technologies. And it's there for something, which is good. And I'm very happy to take the floor on that today. I was in Brussels last week, and I had the opportunity in 48 hours to exchange with the European Commission and with the European Parliament on topics like Data Act, Data Governance Act, Digital Service Act, and so on. With the Data Act, for example, we have a European definition of data, eventually. So it can sound really basic for non-experts, but in fact, that was the result of many discussions to find the right words for everyone and the right translations to all countries. So we have a definition of data. The objective of Data Act, beyond allowing the opening of new data, namely the data coming from connected objects, and to promote that opening of data coming from private connected objects, is to have the calling to create a unique market of data at the European level. It's not going to happen overnight, but the Data Act creates conditions with the Data Governance Act, because both are closely linked. The second one is about creating a frame of trust to have something uniform at European scale. Then there is the applicability, which is really important for local authorities, especially the French local authorities, because often we don't know about the means to reach the target. And that's a fight that I lead. It's very good to have regulations, one after the other, to clarify things, to have something uniform at European level. But how can local authorities assimilate all of these new directives? And in Data Governance Act, it's talked about the altruism of data, the link between public and private fields on data sharing. Very practically today, local authorities in France do not have additional means or additional human resources or support to be as good as can be to react to the opportunities implied in the Data Governance Act or Data Act. So there are many expectations, many things to clarify, and that's also the topic of NIS2. That's something that leads to many questions from local authorities. It is due for the end of the year in France, but let me put it bluntly, we don't know about the size of local authorities that are involved, the size of companies. We don't know about the time given to local authorities to adapt to the directives. These are major and significant topics. What's also interesting about the IA Act, that's what the members of the European Parliament told us, is that the text is no longer the same as the one that was proposed by the Commission. I was a bit skeptical about that IA Act at the beginning, because I think that too much regulation kills regulation. But when I heard the vision of the European Parliament, I was reassured in terms of innovation, and I'd like to quote a sentence here. For them, it's not simply the topic of regulating, but regulating use cases. And that's something that was badly communicated in France. Regulating use cases, and especially high-risk use cases, the AI at high risk, because that's what we mean here, regulating 10 to 15% of AI use cases, the ones that are high risk. That can sound very exciting, but full of information, and we need these frames that will be complex to apply because AI goes so fast. You see, the time to regulate, we're already too late. But my question is, what about the support, the assistance given to local authorities, the adaptability? Because for the time being, we don't have the keys and the answers. And when I went to Brussels last week, I was not helped either. So thank you for your perspective. Let's deep dive a little bit in the Data Act. We've mentioned some regulations, European regulations mostly. Let's detail all of it, because that's the topic of our roundtable. And I have a first question for you, Stéphane Lemaire. When we read the Data Act, it's much talked about the fair access to data to try and create champions at European level or national level. So what about this new regulation on a fair access to data and the use of data? How could it play a role in improving the digital sovereignty of Europe? Good question. Hello, everyone. Within the Inclusive, we've detailed 2 articles that are interesting in terms of sovereignty or reinforced sovereignty provided by the Data Act. And I encourage you to read that as well. So you have Article 28 about the contractual obligations of transparency in terms of access and international transfer, and Article 32, which is the application of the first one. So what does Article 28 tell us? Suppliers of cloud have to provide and maintain, keep up to date on the internet side, the jurisdictions that the IT infrastructure depends on for the services. So that means which country do I depend on, which law do I depend on. And also, second, have a description that is general of the technical, organizational and contractual measures as adopted by the service provider that has the data in order to prevent the international access by public authorities to non-personal data held in the European Union, or the international transfer of the data when the access or the transfer is likely to be in conflict with the EU law or a member state. So we see here that we have a protection. We have the possibility to have a better transparency. The law will force cloud providers to state what they plan from a technical, organizational, contractual point of view to prevent the access to the data. The limits that we see there are linked to what's going to happen when there is a legal proceeding. For example, let me tell you, we've talked about Cloud Act, FISA. I'm going to have access to a non-personal data, and on the other hand, the European law will say, no, you're not entitled to have access. So, of course, we are waiting to see how it's going to happen. And that is probably up to the first legal decisions. They will allow us to clarify things, and we'll see how the cloud providers will solve that legal and ethical difficulty. Thank you for that clarification. Indeed, when we read these articles 28 and 32, we can upskill everyone in terms of protection, also local authorities. And how can we assist them from a budgetary and timing point of view? Because they are usually pretty far from the topic, especially the smallest local authorities. But the cloud is not the final solution. We're back to on-prem, even in the US, and it's not only a vision. The cloud is not the final solution. We have some return of on-prem in the US because there are issues of rate and having a server at home or in the company. And we have a difficulty. We have some software layers that do no longer work on on-prem while it should, namely SAP. They made statements recently on the topic. The Data Act or Data Governance Act, they are going to help us to clarify the legal environment. That's pretty good, but that's not what's going to help us create an economic market. It's going to clarify the rules. But if we do so, we know that our foreign competitors will adjust. And the initiatives that we wanted to launch with Gaia X, and sorry to say so, but it's pretty flat for the time being. Nothing much came out of it. And when we talk about it to young engineers, that superb project no longer exists. So the real solution is to create public markets. We need to proceed as Americans did. Public procurement have to be given to the European companies. And the Americans criticize us for that. They believe that we are the communists. But they have exactly the same regulations. They have a Buy American Act. They need to buy American in the US. And we had that with the American Inflection Act. The cars that could get tax alleviations, they had to be American, built in the US with the American employees. So that was protectionism. Without saying the word, we need to have the same rules, by a European Act and a Small Business Act, because we have public markets that are huge. We don't protect them. We have big buyers that have the necessary money, but they keep the added value. So we don't have the emergence of companies that go from startup to scale up, and then to ETIs and larger scale companies. And again, the market needs to do something. They need to learn to work as a pack. Let's stop considering that the neighbor who might be a competitor because they do something very small, well, no. Get together. Provide a common answer to a tender. In the cyber world, nobody can provide a total answer. Otherwise, no use to have a forum as this one. We need the European political willingness, not national, a European one, to make procurements less tight and also to have companies work together to provide an answer to tenders. So we need to allocate the markets, and we can have then bigger again later on. And in terms of the nuclear industry, I don't think we are in a capacity to have cooperations between the different European countries. In Germany, for example, they don't want any nuclear power. They prefer coal. We are the only ones on the topic. There are a few countries that work with us, but it's not enough. With Airbus, you know, Airbus is Airbus. We don't need to build Airbus. We already have it. And for the defense market, we have some difficulties, but maybe we'll come back on geopolitics to impose a future plane or tank, because we have totally different geopolitical visions. And F-35 is a superb weapon of commercial belief from our American friends.
Thank you very much for shedding some light on that subject. Now, the idea is to see how we can combine the landscape of offer and demand and not look at the competition between different companies. Now, I'd like to have the vision of a territory and have a look at the situation with regards to demand today. And obviously, I'm talking to Constance Nebula. Now, you have both challenges in terms of sharing data so that you can improve the services for citizens and make them more efficient, but you've also got challenges as well in terms of sovereignty, in terms of data confidentiality. And so what are your priorities and also your limits with regards to the way in which you share data and all of the offers that are necessary so that all of this can actually happen? Okay, I'm going to talk with two different hats on, if you like. I'm Vice President of Angers-Loire and the Pays de Loire, because they're two levels of local authorities which play different roles in terms of data. It's very different but complementary at the same time. Now, before I start, I'd like to come back with a joke. Since the beginning, we have been talking about European governance with regards to data. And at the same time, though, we don't even have any French governance. And I'm saying that in a very upfront way because it's something that I've mentioned in all of my presentations with regards to data in France. For years now, we have been waiting for this, and other parliamentary members have been involved in these issues. They have drafted reports on the subject, and they have made interesting proposals that were very constructive, requested by the local authorities, requested by the general public, requested by everyone who's interested in this question and have been for years. And I'm very sorry to have to say that it doesn't seem to be making much progress. And so therefore today, I'm going to use a sentence that I like using. Local authorities are just having to manage on their own. And so on the subject of data, when a local authority or a large metropolitan area takes the decision to create a metropolitan strategy for data, it's its own initiative. And it's an initiative which is necessary, useful, and that we're going to continue to see flourishing in our local authorities in France. Because today, we need to be able to create our own local framework because we produce data, because we use data, and also because we have to share data. And so in Angers Métropole, we are the first metropolitan area in France to have our own metropolitan data strategy. And I'm waiting for everybody to react to say, yes, but others have got charters. They're only charters, so I'm not going to comment on those. And we voted for a metropolitan strategy on data in December 2023, and it's a document which is political, it's strategic, and at the same time, the aim is that it should be rolled out with specific strategies in terms of our administration. And we created this document because Angers is an intelligent, smart territory like many others. We have open data with a very big information service department because it's the metropolitan areas that have to look after their own geographical data. But I'm going to talk about this from a regional point of view. And so we needed to have a framework. We needed to see what our doctrine was. We needed to see what our data governance was on a local level. We needed to decide on our values. What are we going to do, not do in terms of sharing, securing our data, in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of data that is going to be public or private. What's the link as well with satellites, partnerships with local authorities, and nobody has helped us to decide on definitions for this. We had to decide on our own. We were assisted over a year of work with all of the different departments, not only IT, because it's very important to work cross-departmentally, and all of the other departments also create and produce data as well. And so finally, we have a data strategy for the metropolitan area, and I suggest you have a look at it because it's a strategic political document. It's available online on the Angers website, and it's now going to be rolled out for a roadmap for all of our different departments. So that's from a metropolitan point of view. Having said that, the regional scale is also important as well because that's where we share. It's the level and scale where we have the link with all of the different territories and local authorities. That might seem quite obvious, with a 360-degree vision and overview. And that's where we managed to get everyone around the table, the very big local authorities that have their own departments, and then all of the smaller ones that use the region as support for development. Now, I can tell you one thing about the Pays de la Loire. We're very proud of this. Geopal is our sharing platform for geographical data, and it was the first region in France to have a shared platform on a geographical level because geographical data is essential and necessary. We don't talk about it very much beyond all of the people who are in the know and actually use it. But in the future, on a European level, when we start talking about the digital twins program on a European level, we're going to be using geographical data, and therefore on a regional level and at a local level, we're going to have departments and services that are structured with data that is useful. So sharing for geographical data, that's the first thing. And then my second combat and fight is... sorry, have I gone on for too long? I'll just say this very quickly. In 2023, a report was given to Minister Guerny, which is called the Territorial Report, and I participated for Open Data France, and within it there were very interesting directives. Now, I'd just like to say that we haven't had any news about the finality of this report, but in the report there was a recommendation which was on a regional level we should have shared platforms for data exchange, and the fact that we create committees, regional committees for data with stakeholders, including the region, local authorities, the state, centralized services, etc. And so that is what I'm doing at the moment in the Pays de la Loire region. The fact that we have a body, a regional body working on data, not only geographical data, not just open data, but we go even further than that. We go even further than sharing IT departments, etc. And I hope that this is something that will be used on a regional level and on a metropolitan level throughout France in the future. Again, though, we aren't helped very much to make much progress. Well, thank you very much there. Obviously, we've understood your message. Now, I'd like to turn to you, Stéphane. We have now heard of the needs, the requirements in a region, in a metropolitan area. By way of introduction, I said that you led a working group on this subject. Have you got any recommendations that you could make? Have you got anything that you would like to share with us on this subject of sovereignty and sharing data? Yes. Quite simply, sigh of relief. That's a good point if you've got something to share. Yes, because it's because the local authority that you represent or that you drive or steer has been confronted with this problem. Like other companies, like other authorities, the problem whereby we say, okay, I've got solutions, I've got the cloud, or I have choices to make and I have to think of the strategic direction we're going to be heading in. Do I switch to the cloud? Should I stay on premises? What type of data can I put on the cloud? Hyperscaler, have we got to use a European, French solution that isn't subject to territorial legislation? And we've asked ourselves this question, and in Occlusive we realized that lots of people have asked themselves the same question. So we decided to look at the situation, draft a guide which would enable decision makers and people in charge of information systems so that they could understand notions that we hear about a lot, offers, for example, sovereign offers, so that we can give our definition so that they can really understand. And in addition to these definitions, we have used a risk analysis tool with various different approaches and criteria for sovereignty, which can be applied to different organizations or businesses. And amongst this, I'm going to summarize a little bit. Amongst the recommendations, first of all, we said we've got to be able to identify the most sensitive data, the sovereign data, sensitive data, the ICC spoke about, which is the information service for strategy and security, for economic strategy and security, so that we can really give a definition of our data, saying we've got data which is sovereign, which is sensitive, which corresponds to various activities or different business sectors, which for strategic reasons or contractual reasons or reasons linked to legislation are not able to store that data with providers which are subject to territorial legislation or other criteria. And so once you've identified that data, you have to analyze the risks so that afterwards you can say, okay, I'm going to implement a strategy, a doctrine on the basis of data governance within my company. And that's an important point, because that strategy, once it has been validated and once we've been able to analyze as well the budget that will be necessary, because that's always a very important point, you have to look at that. So you've got to have a good compatibility between the needs and the economic capabilities, and then it's up to the top management of the company to make sure that there's a real approach, a real system, a process whereby you can master and control dependency and autonomy in the digital sector. So they're the recommendations that I would make. The working group is going to be publishing its guide in the weeks to come or months to come. So once it's been published, we'll be able to talk about it then. Yes, when you were talking about that, that's work that was carried out with various practitioners, members of different businesses, and you've worked on pragmatic themes. Yes, and all of the companies were invited. So we had hyperscalers who were there, and we had French companies, European companies, And we wanted to shed some light on these notions and try and provide a risk analysis tool. Now, you're amongst these people who have been consulted maybe by Clusid in the work that Stefan has just mentioned. Now, what would you recommend to your customers, your clients, and how are you going to navigate amongst these technical solutions and doctrines, and how can you find a balance, a way of finding an equilibrium? Yes, I like to think about this when we talk about data space. What are we going to do with our data, and that link which would take us towards the cloud, and then from there lead us to a debate as well, where we'll think about America, Europe, and this historical rivalry. And that's why it's so interesting to me. Because to be completely honest with you, when clients come to see me, it depends on the use case. If they have got cases in, for example, a global company which is in America rather than in Asia, there's no reason why we would say, okay, you have to take Europe for Europe, America for America, Asia for Asia. And it's quite typically the whole debate of, okay, we are a little bit on premises, we're in lots of different frameworks with the GAFAM, we're a little bit with Scaleware, we're all over the place. And so that's what everybody here has been saying in maybe a slightly different way, with some disagreements. But I think we need a strategy, whether it be in terms of security, whether it be in terms of cohesion. You've got to find something that's going to be coherent in terms of how you're going to approach your move to cloud, your data, how you could secure that data, your approach to your infrastructure and your applications. And quite typically, to come back to the recommendation that I would give to my clients and how I would interact with them, if the best offer for them, because they don't have any sensitive data, because they don't have any European restrictions, it would be to use a service which is used by Amazon, Google, others in the world. There's no reason why they can't use that, in addition to a European cloud and also with on-premises data. Because for me, I think that's the next version, this idea of a hybrid cloud. From that, I'm talking about not something anywhere in any old place, but there's no reason why, with the new technologies that we have, with high-performance data storage, with disks which are coming more and more high performance, which enable us to store data more quickly. And when we talk about latency, when we talk about traffic to Brazil in the millisecond, there's no reason why we can't have a form of cooperation and agreement in terms of the way in which we roll out our structure, architecture, and our applications, because there'll be some customers and clients. I work in the UK, and the UK government will say, let's stay in the UK with a local establishment. The German government is going to be strict about data laws, and even metadata should not leave Germany. And we'll say, okay, in that case, we'll retrieve that. We take the feedback, we try and listen to where it's coming from, and then we try and take the relevant recommendations so that we can find the best solution for our customer, rather than saying, no, we work in Europe, so you've got to work with the United States, or we'll say, go to the US, we haven't got that product, they're better than us. It depends on the use case, and that's what I encourage everyone to do here in the audience and in your companies. Think about saying, okay, well, we haven't got all of our eggs in the same basket, because that's what lots of people say. We're not going to leave everything in the same place. That's a very good argument. But also, is it going to deteriorate and reduce our performance if we have a use case with different applications? It'll depend on what you want to do. Okay, so be pragmatic, look at the use case. That's something that we've seen a lot in the various conferences and roundtables. There's no stratospherical fight about this, but we're all being very practical and trying to adapt to the use cases. Now, in the introduction, you said to us that, Louis, that first of all, we have to make sure that we secure our data. So that's the on-prem versus cloud solutions, because today we've got too many people who've got old servers, old data centers that are badly protected, etc. And so after that first part of our debate, would you say, well, in that case, there are so many precautions to be taken with the laws, the doctrines, what Stefan said about the work done with Clusive. What's your position with regards to the different subjects that we have already discussed? Now, I'm taking on my role as the person who will defend big, nasty Google, which is what everyone's accused me of since 2006. I work a lot with French players that are top quality. There are several of them here in like Dassault Systems, Upscale, like Scaleway. People here in the audience, and I would like to thank my neighbour who did fantastic work in sharing the data that I mentioned earlier on. So well done for your bravery in having done all of this. But having said that, you mustn't forget that there are the basics to be covered. An infrastructure, a cloud is an infrastructure. So yes, you're right to say, the Member of Parliament, that we have to stay on premises, and that's going to be the next theme in INCYBER that I deal with, because when you're working on data transport, carrying gas, passengers, etc., those environments are very sensitive, and that type of attack can lead to people dying. So you can't play with that. And more, I would recommend that we completely close those industrial environments so that they can be connected to nothing. And that's a real on-premises situation. But when we talk about data, we're talking about infrastructure. And when you're talking about multiple clouds, we've got to be very positive. Take a French company called Snowflake, which is one of the big players of data storage. They are multi-cloud. You can have snow cloud everywhere on the market, and its transportability does exist. I try to look at the positive side, the pragmatic side that I'm trying to put forward. That works really well. And France and Europe in particular, if there are major players who are not French or not European, well, we can't go back in time, but we are very good in Europe, in France, in software, whether it be for cyber or other fields. Just imagine examples that you've all heard of. We criticized Doctolib to be on Amazon Web Services. What a scandal. But when President Macron said, we'll have to change tomorrow, had they been on premises, you can imagine we would never have had our vaccine. BlaBlaCar, which is on Google, they've had to reduce their infrastructure by 95% in a day. It's essential for people in software to have that type of flexibility that's offered by Amazon and Google. They're two examples that you've all heard of, Doctolib and when we talk about espionage, data protection, we mustn't forget that France, like everyone, it's not only the Americans, the French spy as well, are North Koreans, and the Russians as well. All of them spy on each other, and the French do it too, and the English do too. In terms of what comes out of the UK to go to America, on all of the fiber optics, there are sensors, and that means that in the cloud you have to encrypt all of your data on your own internal fiber, because you know that it's going to be pirated. So we're not in a nice, happy, cuddly world. We have to live with all of this, but you've got to be very pragmatic. And thank heavens that 95% of the organizations don't have that type of concern, and they don't have to think about their state. So let's focus on data, sharing data, protecting data. There are excellent solutions today which are available even in France. Thank you, Louis. Thank you very much for those firm beliefs. And that enables us to move on to the last part of our debate today. And to take it from a different level, we're going to be looking to the future. And Philippe Latombe, this is something that you mentioned several times, because in terms of geopolitics, we are going through a difficult period. I think if we think of the geopolitical changes that we are going through, what position should we defend, or what would you suggest with regards to the subject that is close to our hearts today? We're not at ENA, and we're not going to look at the geopolitical situation of the whole world, but as far as our subject is concerned, what would you like to say? I'd like to come back to two subjects that will help answer your question. So yes, the state isn't the best example of what should be done and what is being asked of local authorities. And, I am a member of parliament, I'm not a member of the government, but quite clearly the state is asking for a lot of things but doesn't do it themselves. So managing data, etc. We have got the IR9 document with sensitive data, and it doesn't apply to them. The first thing they said was to say, okay, it doesn't apply to us. There are lots of issues. And I would even agree with Louis And with my neighbor here, I'm convinced that multi-cloud is the solution. And when I say multi-cloud, I mean on-prem, but different clouds as well from different suppliers and providers. Because in the first year of business school or in the first year of economics, you're told that if in a company, you have only one supplier, then you become that supplier's property. Now, if you think of COVID, we had a problem with supply and we suffered because of that. And so we realized that when we only have one supplier, then we have to put up with their conditions. And that's why people are going back to on-prem, and sovereignty isn't just a question of spying. And now we look at Pfizer, the Cloud Acts, etc. The real difficulty is the economic dependency. Today, we are a digital colony, an American digital colony. That raises geopolitical questions, even in terms of businesses. And on the cloud today, what is the subject that everyone's talking about since the last 3 weeks? The increase in tariffs, and that's just the beginning. And we'll see tariffs which are going to be multiplied by 4, 5, 6, 7, because those companies that are in a monopoly situation have got to be able to make money. I'll give you a second example. Oracle, same thing. And so we're going to have to find solutions so that we can move away from this dependency, and we've started to do so, and DMA is used for that. We started doing it, but we've got to try and, if you look at the geopolitical situation, we've got the Americans, who are in specific difficulties because in November they're going to have a presidential election. Now, whoever comes in, whether it be the blonde or somebody else who becomes president, they're going to have to put the country back together. Geopolitically, they're going to have to reassure the Americans and stitch up the center of the United States to make sure that it's still joined to the rest. Now, if it's Trump, he'll do it more brutally than somebody else, but otherwise they're going to start looking inwards, and they're going to no longer follow us on some issues. And as the economy is global, they're going to have some economic problems, and they're going to have to find an enemy. And the enemy has been named. We all know that whatever the administration may be, we all know who the enemy is. The enemy for America is China. And so the Americans are going to say to Europeans, what are you doing? Are you with us against the Chinese, or are you against us? Because if you're not with the Americans against the Chinese, it's going to be like being against the Americans. Something's going to happen like that. And so we've seen, and if I come back to the Airbus-Boeing case, it was a war which was long, difficult, painful for companies because it was based on economic territories. And so there could be two ways of holding back. So you could say, okay, either there will be customs duties. We're used to that. We also put customs duties on American products, for example. Secondly, a little bit like they started to do with the Chinese and in Hawaii, etc., we'll say the service level that we offer you for critical services, well, we're not going to give that anymore. And they're doing this because today they're doing it for buying chips. NVDA, in the AI war, the Americans have said to the Dutch company that makes the chips, okay, you're not allowed to export to the Chinese, and that way we're going to make sure that the Chinese can't make their own chips, or at least the new ones. And in addition to that, they have a 200 billion plan for buying chips. The federal state, plus all of the big hyperscalers, they are buying 200 billion in chips. And so I challenge anyone to find NVDA chips to sell on the market. There just aren't any anymore. And so the real difficulty is that dependency. And for AI, we've got to have a power of calculation. If we don't have that, it's the new chips that will enable us to reduce the ecological imprint of that calculation. And so if we don't catch up, then we're going to be lost. So it's not a question of are the Americans nice or not. We've got to see whether we can not be dependent. Can we make our own choices? And if we no longer have a choice, then if my hands are tied, I don't know how I can operate. And so sovereignty isn't just a question of nasty Americans. It's not true, because they're allies. If we hadn't had the Americans, we wouldn't be able to defend Ukraine. But if they no longer support us, then we can't support Ukraine either. But you can't see it from that point of view. There is an opposite side to this, which is the economic intervention. The Americans are there to sell their products and make sure that the economy continues. So the real vision we should have, from my point of view, but it will be the same for a business or a local authority, how can I preserve my capabilities to make choices, be independent, and the possibility to be able to continue to run my business and do what I do? That's the real question as far as geopolitics are concerned, because you can feel that there is a split in the world. I'm not even talking about the Russians here or Africa, because we're already talking about platforms that exist. Okay, thank you for that geopolitical feedback. Now if we have a look at the future and look at technologies, because things are happening as well, and you mentioned chips earlier on, and maybe we can look at other subjects as well. Stefan, for example, in terms of AI today, do you think that development of AI, first of all, it will generate new business, but how is it going to influence the rollout of data and all of these data spaces? And can you see accelerators? Can you see obstacles? What is your way of understanding this? First of all, when we look at companies, their dependence, they have only one partner, as big as it may be, or as powerful and important as it may be. It can cause economic problems, because once they've got the whole market, it's easier to say, okay, every year we're going to increase the price a little bit more. Now, from an IA point of view, we can see that there has been huge growth. We're conscious of that. I don't need to remind you of that. In companies, not a day goes by without there being a new use case where we say, okay, we're going to be saving money and time by using artificial intelligence. And in data, in the way in which I include this or understand this, I think it could be applied, the Data Act, because AI is going to be a service, and it is going to work with the data that is going to be within the protected environment. However, we're going to ask ourselves exactly the same questions as the MP just mentioned in terms of dependency. And we really do need to find AI tools that we can control and that we can develop, so that we're not dependent on people who are going to update this AI or make it evolve, but who are outside the European territory, for example. So it's that same problem. You've got the data which is at the center. We can see that hosting is a bit of a battle. We've got hybrid solutions, multi-cloud, and in AI we're going to have exactly the same approach, I think. Now, if we want to talk about the use cases, Joanne, earlier on, you were really focusing on this. You said to guide my customers. I talk about use cases, and I think it's only from that point onwards that we can advise them. If we take a use case in the bank, in banks or financing, if we talk about open banking and digital banking, do you think there is a cooperation model in terms of data? We've already had a lot of discussions about this, either forced or not, in the banking world. But how do you understand this?
That's a good question. From a personal point of view, I'm half French, half Swedish. I grew up in London, and I work with a German company based in Berlin. So all of these countries have a different perspective on data. And that's great, because there is a cultural interference and plenty of things. The pragmatic side of things is difficult, because when I go to Berlin, it's based on a cash company, cash society. Not always obvious when you come from London, where I haven't seen any cash for 10 years. And you have that approach of standardization of data, of European data sharing that would allow any initiative, and I have here in mind good initiatives like in Sweden, when you have your ID at a citizen that is used for your health services, taxes, shopping, everything is linked. And the idea of extending that vision to Europe and not wondering if you have enough cash for this or there, or if your identity card is sufficient to register and so on. And when you try to promote a more flexible and open economy in terms of jobs and opportunities, that data inclusion, because it's not because you are Swedish that you cannot be identified in the French government, because you don't pay taxes here, because you're based in the UK and so on. All of that is going to help us. And for the open banking, it gives back the power to citizens, and it allows travels, international travels, personal travels, and that openness on the European markets to create a more cohesive and powerful economy, according to me. Thank you. Let's go on the exercise of prospective. And I'd like to come back on technologies and quantum. Today, Louis, do you think that quantum, even if we are only at the start of it, if it can be disruptive? And what kind of disruption? You've talked about encryption at the beginning. What's your vision, your prospective vision, with what regards data and data protection? I'm going to answer in a minute, but a few comments first as a reaction to what has been said and about competition and price increases. I see the other way around. When you work with a public cloud that you have to pay to remove your data, Google said, I stop having people pay for the exit, and others followed suit. There is a highly competitive world. The day is going to increase in terms of power is not tomorrow. Then we are all interdependent, and the MP has mentioned it. At the start of the worldwide digital world, there is a European society that's ASML. They manufacture devices to design chips, and that's a worldwide monopoly. If it stops, Taiwan and the others, no one can manufacture any longer. The world depends on everyone. It's an interconnected and fragile world. Now, let me come back on your question on the quantum. Even if I'm not highly skilled on that, I would recommend the exceptional Olivier Ratti books. He publishes every month a Bible, 1,000 pages on quantum. I don't understand 3/4 of it, but I read it anyway. And to answer your question, I published a review on INCYBER on the topic, and I'm having a bad mood because there's a kind of fight that I hear about for the time being. Quantum is going to kill encryption. It's not the topic. And Olivier Ratti says maybe in 15 times, but there are so many emergencies in terms of immediate security that wondering about what could happen when quantum will come to us, that's no real topic. Let's be more pragmatic than that. Even if it can be of interest for some researchers who work on it. The day your encryption will be killed by quantum, maybe 15, 20 years from now on, and who knows what's going to happen then. Thank you, Louis. One last question for you, and then we'll take the questions from the audience. Constance Nebula, you chair Open Data France, and you started a consultation to define the positioning of the association. Does that mean the objective is to have a panel of actions, a wider scope of actions, compared to what you have explained and to your beliefs? Well, wider, not exactly, but probably different. Open Data France is an association that dates back from 10 years. I was already an elected representative then, and the ecosystem of data in France is no longer the same as 10 years ago. Then the issue of open data towards data is an open question, because after the law for Digital Republic in 2016, where we forced local authorities to open the data, that's open data by default, today only 15% of local authorities that should open their data do so. What does that mean? The glass ceiling has been reached between those who had the necessary means, those who had political ambition, those who liked technology. We have reached a ceiling. And we need to believe people differently. And how can we convince the mayor of a municipality with 10,000 citizens, the chair of a rural community or a region overseas to do some open data for many different reasons? I believe they need to be convinced by the use case of data and explain my colleagues that it's not really turning political, but rather We are political leaders. We have less and less money, and we need to do more and more and better, because there is a requirement from our citizens. How can we use data the best way to turn data into political tools? That means that the association, Open Data France, that was supporting from a technical point of view local authorities on simply the openness of data, I think that they have another role nowadays. And much more than pleading for standards or that kind of thing, reuse, I would rather wonder how we can convince, extend the topic, and turn it popular. And it can maybe sound basic for you, but in the world of local authorities, I would state that it does not exist. Our maturity level, and Philippe will agree with me, is close to zero from my elected representative colleagues. There was a consultation last January. First, it was a closed consultation. It ended with an online event on the 7th of February. And now we have an open consultation process, and I wish all the people who feel involved, also private people, because we have that debate, do we remain an association for local authorities or only for the public? And maybe there are stakeholders who would like to have exchanges with us, and that's normal, because if it is the entry port for authorities, it's a good point. So we have an open consultation that is open on the website. The only criteria is, are you legitimate to have an opinion on data topics in France? If you think you are, then I would say that your opinion is of interest to me, if you are a public or private stakeholder. And that consultation will end on the 17th of April at the Ministry of the Cohesion of Territories and the Digital Transition, with the ministers involved. Yeah, and that's our umbrella ministry and the only one supporting us from a financial point of view, but that's another debate. So on the 17th of April, don't hesitate. That's really a time of feedback, work, and scenarios. I've been chairing the association for 1 year, and I can admit that taking over the chairwomanship and wonder 1 month after if we are legitimate to do so, I can tell you that the association can have another role tomorrow and maybe a support of many people for its action. Thank you for your bravery and conviction. Let's take the questions from the audience. Let me hand over the mic. Thank you. Maybe I can answer the question about open data. I took an interest in that in 2010, and there was a competition in Rennes putting information on public bikes in town, and there was a mobile app, and there was a competition there, and it involved also private stakeholders. It created a need. I'm from the private sector, and we need data, and we have many use cases in terms of model shift in towns, and we would like to know the data that we could work on jointly. My approach is rather one of value creation rather than business creation. And in terms of model shift, it's extremely important. Towns are willing to put forward that model shift, but we need a lot of data. And we work with models with a lot of AI, and we need real data, plenty of real data. With open data, what we see is too discrete. We don't have a wide volume enough to work on use cases. Maybe it was the case 10 years ago, but it's no longer true. So, as you say, first, open data is a smaller topic than data. And the topic today is no longer open data, but data. The use, collection, sharing data for local authorities with the private sector. And the second topic that I agree with you is that open data on demand is even more relevant than by default. I don't consider that publishing an Excel file of the first names of the municipality that are the more popular, well, it's of no interest. What's the use case? What's the public policy? Today and in 2023, we've worked a lot on data and transition software, where we were supported by the Bank of Territories, and we highlighted use cases of local authorities that use data for the transition. I mean, mobility, biodiversity, health. That's how we can convince people. That's how we can also break that wall between public and private sectors. And that's nearly the introduction to our roundtable, because the Data Governance Act also creates a frame of sharing between the public and the private sectors, and I really believe in that. And as an elected representative, even if some colleagues do not agree with me, I would state that I believe we should share with the private sectors. Everybody has data that is interesting to produce and to share. So we need better cooperation agreements, and also local authorities have to be able to follow. And it's difficult in terms of human means, maturity, but let's not despair. We'll make it. Another question? Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for the debate. It was extremely interesting. I have a question that is rather linked to the way the data, even security, is managed at the public level and the level of authorities. I was part of discussions yesterday around the security and local authorities, and I have the feeling that there is a lack of governance on the whole of the territory, a lack of budget. And honestly, that's something that I'm discovering. So I'd like to know if that's indeed the case and how we can change things to improve the situation. If you allow me to take the floor, I'm part of a new project launched by DIFNOR. They have a stand here, to create a document to help local authorities to migrate in the cloud. I don't know if you knew that it existed. And before the summer, the document will be published. So yes, some efforts are made, and I'm part on a volunteer basis to their project to help them. So people are getting aware of the phenomenon. And there are some major municipalities, 200 or 300 structures that have the means to do so, while other municipalities have zero means. Indeed, things are happening. I agree. Not fast enough, at low cost. That is, not enough funds are dedicated to that. Even the state finds it difficult to do it for themselves, so they transfer that to local authorities. Today, the state produces data everywhere, but in silos. The national education produce their own data and don't transfer the data to other ministries. Many things aren't shared, though it is necessary. The cloud technically allows us to do so, and we should have the possibility to process data. We have one DPO per ministry nowadays. We have one information system per ministry, and they are not able to agree on what the data is, how to store the data, how it works. That's stupid. And we see clearly that we have a Secretary of State, a former delegate minister, that was under the umbrella of Bercy, while it should be steered. Most other countries, for example, Luxembourg, the Prime Minister was the Minister of Finances at the same time. And 5 years ago, the Prime Minister was the Ministry of IT, Digital Services of Luxembourg, because they thought it was the most important point. Monaco does huge efforts on the topic, and we're not able to do so. And that's a real open topic, and we see that in the laws. There is namely the text on NIS 2. It will be in the hands of Marina Ferrari for Bercy, because it's digital, but it will be built by ANSI. That depends directly on the Prime Minister. So we don't know who leads what and how we're going to discuss the topic. So there is a real issue of cohesion. And as I have the mic, I'd like also to tell Louis that I don't agree at all with you. Your example is a question for me, because it's not because there is competition that the egressy have disappeared is because the DMA was there. They said in a few years' time there will be no degressy. And we said that it was from the publishing of the law that is going to happen. And when Google starting it, the authority of competition came to see them and they said, you are forced to do so for all people the same way. And so it has nothing to do with competition but regulation. Fortunately, we're there for something from time to time. Do we have one last question from the audience? Would somebody like to benefit from our speakers? Can we say one final word? Yeah, we are a bit late, but the organizers are okay with a final word. So the atmosphere is certainly difficult with MPs. So my final word is totally on the same line, because having the principle that one day we finally have a minister of the digital technologies that depends on the prime minister and that is cross-cutting for all ministries, that's my dream. So we'll have a dream all together. And my final word is the following one. And here we are talking about data. But when does it become a political topic? When will we eventually have a governance topic, a real public service around data? When do we stop talking about technologies, even if you are all good technicians? When does it become a political topic or even a policy? That's my final word. So we still have many fights. Louis? Thank you. We are at least three there. So we are here talking about cyber world. I prefer talking about cyber trust than cyber security. And I'd like to finish with a message of hope, something positive. The offer of solutions to be protected around data is much higher than the demand. I would challenge any political person to understand what is here in this forum. Even when I walk around, I don't understand it all. Let's pick our fights or priorities. We have the means to protect the data and share our data, because we can't share what we don't protect. There are plenty of different means to do so. So let's keep positive and not focus on what could not work. Let's start trying to see where we can have success. There are plenty of things ahead in cyber trust. So thank you for that positive message. Johan? Let's be as positive as well, but very different, because I have no political challenge here to take up. No, that's joking. But to me, a final word on the European revenge and data spaces, I think that has to do with use cases. We have all said so. We need to find a strategy, find what we need, what is important to protect, how to do so, what you want to protect. Because I still have many customers who say, we want to protect it all equally, while it's not always necessary. And from then on, have no fears. You can start new products, American products, European, Asian products, or products from anywhere in the world. But let's be aware that maybe the European approach, which is more local, depending on your business, can be worthwhile. And let's discuss with the European people and systems. It's a use case, and that's what you want to do in your strategy that will direct you. And we have a stand here if you want to discuss with us. I'm not too sure where it is. Ah, G40. There it is. So, use cases and strategy. As everybody has been very positive, and that I agree with all of you, I'm going to be negative. So we face a complicated time for France in terms of cyber, because with the Olympic Games, with the geopolitical positioning of France, we are entering a time of difficulties. And that's very negative what I'm telling you. I think it's going to shake quite a lot. And we saw that on Monday, 2 weeks ago, we had a DDoS attack. Just before we were supported the plan of support to Ukraine, and before the president talked about that plan, and will soon be shaken. And that's an advantage because the large public is going to be aware of cybersecurity. And we see that each time there is an attack. We saw that with health insurance. That generates an awareness raising for the citizens because they did not appreciate seeing that their IDs were shared, had been leaked. So I think that cybersecurity will be more communicated on. Citizens will be more aware of it. And NIS2, I thought it would be too late, but NIS2 will benefit from it and will not be just as another constraint for companies or legal risk and additional money to spend for local authorities. I think cybersecurity will find its place in the governance of data and the protection of companies and organizations. Stéphane? So I would come back on that awareness raising. It's necessary in companies and organizations. We need to be more aware of the control and dependencies. We need to check in all organizations, in all companies, what we depend on. What are the strategic stakeholders? And that's how we can structure things. That's how we'll know what we need to protect first due to cyber attacks and data protection. Many thanks. Let's give a round of applause to our speakers. It was really a pleasure to prepare and to moderate this roundtable. Thank you for all of you. And